Okay, we're gonna get started. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I'm in here by myself, so I am not able to see the chat at the moment. Jerry's working on getting me another computer. So we'll just keep on moving along here and just put your questions into chat, and maybe at the end I'll be able to take a look at those and answer some as we go along. So this is the kindergarten entry and exit alternate assessment KEEP profile training. And so some of you may or may not have been on the earlier webinar, or some of you may have attended a live person-to-person KEEP training this summer. Couple materials that you will need prior to administering the KEEP, and even if you wanted to go in and pull them up today if you don't have them in front of you, it would be helpful. You need the guide to the kindergarten entry and exit alternate assessment, and that just gives you some of the participation guidelines that we're going to go over today, a little information about the assessment, how to score the assessment, and then it will also give you websites for the data gateway and the reporting and testing windows. So that's just kind of a guide for you to keep handy throughout the year. The other material is the actual alternate assessment rubrics, and you can find all of those at the USBE assessment website underneath the kindergarten tab, and they're at the very end. So really quickly, our agenda today, what are we going to look at? We're going to look at what the purpose of the KEEP and the KEEP alternate is. So it may be review for some of you. We'll look at who qualifies to take the KEEP alternate assessment, so some of those participation guidelines. We'll look at the assessment and items themselves and how we score them. We won't look at every single rubric, but we'll look at least the first couple and how you go about scoring those items. And then we'll look at the data entry procedures. So really quickly, just to recap, what is the purpose of the regular KEEP? So the regular KEEP was developed to help identify student needs, look at some of those early intervention instructions, and promote the differentiation of instruction for all students, which I think follows suits here for our alternate as well. So I did see a comment come through about not being able to hear anything from Wendy. Can anybody else hear? Is that good? Okay, so maybe Wendy, check your speaker. So one of the other purposes of the regular KEEP was looking at effective instructional practices for students and improving that student achievement outcomes. See. And now it won't get rid of that, Jerry. Let's see. So if I try to advance. Okay, so one of the other purposes that they generated the regular KEEP was to look at current levels of academic and social performance upon entrance and exit of kindergarten for our kiddos, and to be able to have some data-informed decision-making upon some of those early learning initiatives and cost benefits. One of the other big reasons was the look at the influence and impact of all-day kindergarten. So that was why they started the regular KEEP assessment. And here is the purpose of the alternate. So there's a section of IDEA that states that a state must ensure that all children with disabilities are included in all general state and district-wide assessment programs. So that means either with appropriate accommodations or an alternate assessment that is decided upon by an IEP team. So that is why we create alternate assessments. So let's look at who qualifies to take our KEEP alternate assessment. So this is for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, right? So a student with a significant cognitive disability not only has an impact on the intellectual functioning, but also the adaptive functioning components as well. So that means their day-to-day living skills. So it's just not a student that may have a low IQ, but they also can't dress themselves, can't get to and from school or toileting or feeding. So looking at those components of that adaptive behavior. So one of the other things is that the student is learning content linked to our Utah core standards through our essential elements. So students will be instructed in our alternate achievement standards. So these students require extensive, repeated, direct, individualized instruction, and they also require substantial supports to make measurable gains in age-appropriate curriculum. It's determined by an IEP team. So a teacher or a principal or a district person by themselves cannot decide that a student would qualify to take an alternate assessment. It's a team decision, and those IEP teams determine that a student has a significant disability that affects them instructionally. Therefore, they would then qualify for an alternate assessment. So what is participation in the alternate KEEP not? It's not just specifically a disability category. So we would never say all of my students who are autistic will take an alternate assessment. It's not a student who, for this sake in kindergarten, Johnny stayed home with mom and never did preschool or daycare or any sort of social interactions and just doesn't know anything and is really behind. That would not be a reason to give a student an alternate assessment. So we wouldn't want to just give it to a student because they're an EL student, right? And so they have a language barrier. It has to be a student that an IEP Janice said, we paused for a moment, but I think we're good to go. Jerry, I just got a thumbs up from Jerry. Okay, so let's now look at our KEEP alternate design and logistics. And there's my chat bar coming up again. There we go. Okay, so KEEP alt and design. So what was the goal? The goal was to create this off of the alignment of our essential elements for kindergarten standards, and it was to be aligned with the indicators that are the greatest predictors of future academic success. So what we did is we sat down with teaching and learning and assessment and said, okay, you have identified the regular standards that are your greatest predictors for students. Which essential elements align with that? So they actually sat down with us and went through each individual kindergarten standard and our essential elements and said these are the ones that align closest with what we have done on the regular KEEP. So that is how we came up with what essential elements we were going to choose to write the alternate assessment off of. So just like the regular scoring categories, we social need KEEP. And just so you know, Jerry got me another computer, so I now. So if you have any questions, go ahead and let me look at the three same categories. So really quickly, here is a literacy overview. So we are going to look at text structure and recognition. We'll look at writing. We'll look at phonological awareness, word and letter recognition. We're going to look at print, concepts, and fluency. And for this assessment, we've combined the two. The skill sets and what was being asked in those essential elements were very similar. And then we'll also look at knowledge of ideas under literacy. For numeracy and emotional, we didn't change anything. We kept with exactly what they were looking at in the regular KEEP, and we felt like that some of these categories and what they were looking for in there actually suited our kiddos maybe even a little bit better. These are things that we already are looking for or tracking or taking data on with this group of kiddos anyway. So we left that all the same. So when looking at our testing window, it's going to be the exact same testing window for the alternate as the regular KEEP. You've got those 3 weeks prior and the 3 weeks after your first day of kindergarten for your LEA. Data entry is going to be the exact same in Data Gateway, and we're going to look at that later, and that will be due by September 30th. And then the exit window will also follow suit and be the last 4 weeks of kindergarten, and that data will be due in Data Gateway by June 15th. So let's take a look at kind of the overview of our alternate assessment rubrics. And I don't know if any of you have them printed out in front of you or on a screen, but the way we designed this alternate assessment, if you are familiar with our DIBELS alternate assessment, it's rubric-based. We had a lot of feedback that was really positive from those elementary teachers that they really liked those rubrics, and it gave them some great instructional data and components, and so we kept the formatting the same, knowing that there are probably several of our teachers that teach that K-3 or K-6, and so we wanted to kind of keep that consistency amongst what our assessments look like. So that's how we decided to go with this rubric format for the KEEP alternate, and it assesses skills for early literacy and numeracy, and it is directly related to the domains and clusters of our essential elements for ELA and mathematics for these kiddos. So the rubrics are meant to be completed by a kindergarten teacher for each student, and it's supposed to be, in essence, based on possibly student IEP goals, or this can help you create student IEP goals. And really it's supposed to be geared around what is the everyday instruction in the classroom looking like with early literacy and numeracy. So this really wasn't designed to be a sit down and administer one-on-one type assessment, but it could be if a teacher chooses so, or you may find that you'll have some skill sets in here that you may have to administer one-on-one. And you're going to use the same rubric for entry and the same rubric for exit, so you won't change. We do suggest that maybe you should use a different colored pen to mark those entry and exit dates and skill sets where they're at. One of the things that is different on the alternate entrance exam is that this is based off of kindergarten standards. So most of you hopefully know that we don't have alternate pre-kindergarten standards. So unlike the regular KEEP that based their entry off of those standards, we didn't have that ability. So when we go through and we're looking at this rubric and we're looking at these skill sets and we're looking at our kiddos, it is expected that our kids may not be at a proficient or target level on these rubrics at the beginning of the year, right? The expectation would be that these are skills that they're going to learn throughout the school year. So let's take a look at our first rubric and how they are laid out. So on the left-hand side, you're going to find your domain and cluster, and those are pulled straight from the essential elements. So if you look at our first one here, under Reading Foundations, this one is Print Concepts and Fluency. So this is the one that we combined. As you move across your rubric, you're going to find our essential element. So for here, we have the two essential elements combined. So we wrote those out for you. And as you progress to the right, you're going to move across now your performance levels, and within those performance levels, you're going to have all of our skill sets. And we have 5 performance levels. We have not yet emerging, approaching target, at target, and advanced. And if you noticed, advanced is our bridge to the Utah core. So those are going to be the skill sets that make up what a student is expected to know at target, and then possibly some other skill sets that we felt would be what gets them to being into that core instruction. And if you have a student that you're finding is coming back and is able to master the skill sets at target and advanced, and especially at the beginning of the year, this is possibly a student that may be able to actually access the general KEEP assessment. So if you find that with your kiddos that they really are at that target or advanced, the alternate may not be the best assessment for them, even if they are a student with a significant cognitive disability. So if you look at our performance levels, if you'll notice, even at not yet emerging, which is a student is not able to demonstrate any skills at an emergent level, they're still going to get 1 point. So you won't have a student that ends up at the end of this with 0 points. So let's look at how to score at a performance level and move across those levels. So for a student to score within a performance level, whether it's emerging or approaching target or at target, they need to be able to do each skill that is listed in that column to mastery. And what does mastery look like? Mastery is determined by the teacher. But typically, when we look at has a student mastered something, it's typically 80% correct or 80% independence as just kind of a general guideline. But you as a teacher, you get that discretion. If you decide mastery for this skill set, or this performance level for a student needs to be 100% accuracy, then that's what you're going to shoot for. But in order to move from, example here, emerging to approaching target, we have to be able to accomplish both of those skill sets. So when we had talked earlier about how this was not necessarily meant to be a one-on-one administered assessment, what are some things that you can use to help you determine what you could look at for measuring those skills? So one of the things you could use is anecdotal notes, work samples. I envision photographs or videotapes or things like that. Performance data would maybe come towards the exit, end of year. But a lot of it may simply be observations, whether it be individual students, small group, or whole class. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you're going to go about gathering this information for your students. And noting that a student may need to use assistive technology, whatever that may be, whether if you've got a student using Dynavox or PEX cards or some sort of sign language component, any of that stuff is allowable. There really aren't parameters around accommodations and things that you can do. Whatever it is that a student has in an IEP and things that they're using to communicate how they can demonstrate a skill is allowable. So, and also knowing that there's a variety in the ways that students are going to show how they can master each skill in each column there's just a variety in that way. So for an example, we may have one student who may be identifying details in a story by selecting an item out of a variety of items on maybe a message output device, while another student may be selecting from a field of 5 or a field of 3. You know, you may have another student who can verbally output, what those details in a story may be. So just remembering that each student is going to demonstrate these skills differently, but what you want to keep in mind is that for each indicator, you would want to have that student assessed in the same way from entrance and exit the best that you can. Also, we do know that some students may progress in their communication. So you may have a student using a PEC system at the beginning of the year, and they may be into some sort of actual assistive technology communication device by the end of the year. But what you wouldn't want to do is you wouldn't want to say, man, I really liked the way I did that with Sally better than I did with Johnny, so maybe this time I'll try it this way with Johnny. So you want to keep some sort of consistency within how you're presenting and how you're going about assessing each of these indicators with students so that you can get that kind of growth component as you move about. So we do have a question. Do I or the SPED teacher administer this? So Hillary, I'm guessing, are you a general ed teacher then? I think you want to include as many people that are working with this kiddo as possible. So, and if you look at what is going on with the rubric and the skill sets that are being assessed, it may be a para. You may be getting advice from a para. Hey, when Sally typically gets her book, how is she opening it? How is she turning the pages? Is she really paying attention? So you can gather this information from multiple sources. And I didn't get an answer back from Hillary if she was a gen ed teacher. So that's something you're going to want to figure out within your own LEA, or your own district or school, who's going to input that information. But when we get into Data Gateway, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you're going to see all of your kindergartners for your school listed in the Data Gateway. So there won't be a distinguished list between our students taking an alternate and our students taking the general. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, Hillary. One of the things we had also talked about in one of our face-to-face trainings with a group of teachers was possibly getting in touch with the student's preschool teacher to see if they could help give you any information about where a student is on these rubrics, and especially for that beginning of the year. Okay, so let's get into looking at the rubric and how we actually score it. So if we look at our first page of our rubric, if we said, okay, so student can open the book with the correct orientation and they can point to and or repeat the title of the familiar book during a shared reading experience, they would then be at emerging level. So when you look at the rubric, not yet emerging is going to be the exact same all the way across. As you move forward, one of the things we didn't do is we didn't say, okay, for every emerging skill, for each essential element, we're going to have 2 skill sets in there. We took each one individually and decided which skill sets we felt best fit in there, so you're not going to find a consistent number of skill sets necessarily in each proficiency level. So for this one, in order to move from emerging to approaching target, the student would have to accomplish both of those skill sets at what the teacher feels would be mastery. Another thing here is, if you notice, your skill sets from, say, emerging, moving through approaching target, they stay the same, and then each added skill set that makes up that performance level is bolded. So that is one thing that's different from the DIBELS alternate rubrics that we decided would be beneficial here. When going from target to advanced, you'll notice the skill sets that make up performance levels prior to target are not in advanced. So in advanced, you're going to only find those skill sets that distinguish a student from target and approaching target, plus any new skill sets that would bridge them beyond. So that's how they are set up. So for this case, we're going to say our student was able to do both those skill sets, but was not yet able to attend words or pictures. So we're here at emerging. Then you move on to the next one. Can the student identify pictures that correspond with a spoken single syllable word? Student is not yet able to do that, so they're still here at not yet emerging. Then here, so student was able to distinguish between letters and pictures for phonics and word recognition, and they're able to identify their written name. However, they're not able to recognize the first letter in their name, so that would put them back here at approaching target. For craft and structure, student can determine which pictures are similar and which pictures are different. So student was not able to do that yet, so that would put them back here at not yet emerging. And right here, okay, so student can select a familiar book, but they cannot yet identify the pictures in the book when prompted. So that would put them back here at emerging. Next one, is student able to determine between similar or different based on physical characteristics, and student is not yet able to do that. So that would put them back here at not yet emerging. For conventions of standard English, here, student can distinguish between objects and print, but student does not quite yet understand that I or me refers to themselves, so that would put them back at not yet emerging. And then on page 7, as you move through your rubrics, you will have this kind of overall score sheet where you can go back through and you add up your scores for each essential element. So does that make sense how we came to a score? So here, for example, under conventions of standard English, our student was at not yet emerging, so they got 1 point. So when I fill it out in my rubric here, they get 1 point. So our student had 10 out of a possible 35 points for the literacy strand. So kind of same as what the KEEP regular assessment, what they're doing with that. We don't yet know what that 10 out of 35 means. We are going to go in with the regular KEEP at the same time to the Center of Assessment and work with them on standard setting and looking at what proficiency scores should be. So for right now, we just know we've got 10 out of 35. So I want to kind of pause for a moment and see if anyone has any questions or concerns about how you would look at scoring. I'm not seeing anything pop up in the chat box. Okay, so when looking at numeracy, you're going to do the same thing. So you'll go through and you'll look at each skill set and decide whether a student has it mastered. So the one thing we found when we put numeracy together was a lot of our essential elements were very similar to what the regular kindergarten standard was, because so many of these skill sets in numeracy are already at your basic entrance level. So we really had a hard time backwards chaining, if you will. So you're going to notice within the math rubrics, there's a lot more like hierarchy of prompting that goes into the skill sets. So student can do with teacher, student can do independently. And so that's what helps move them through the rubrics. So for this one, for knowing number names and counting sequences, this student, in order to be emerging, would need to repeat the teacher counting 1 to 5. And student can count with teacher 1 to 5. So if we said student was able to do this one, but not this one, they're not yet emerging. Moving forward here, emerging student can place the correct number of counters and objects on a preset dot, one at a time, so using numbers 1 through 5. So student was not able to do that yet. That would put them at not yet emerging. So when we look at scoring this, you're just going to do the same thing as you did literacy. You're just going to move through the rubric. Can they do that skill? Can they not do that skill? Where does that fall for them? So same thing here, student is able to identify the difference between a single object and a group of objects, but could not yet identify the group that is more. So looking at operations and algebraic thinking here, student can put two objects together, they can separate two objects, but when given a group of objects, they couldn't add one more. So that would put them at the emerging skill sets. So looking at geometry, identifying and describing shapes, student was able to identify a shape from a number or letter, and they were able to match two shapes that are the same, but student was not able to group two shapes that were of the same orientation or variety. So that put them back at approaching. And then same thing, at the end you'll have your score sheet where you can add up your numbers. So as we discussed previously, typically I would expect our kiddos to be in that emerging, not yet emerging proficiency level at the beginning of the year, right? These are kindergarten essential elements. These are skills that we would expect them to have at the end of kindergarten, and so target is where we're shooting for at the end of the year. So the idea is hopefully that we'll see progression, that we can take these skill sets, and if our student is not yet emerging or emerging, we have a place to start with our instruction and can see progress across the school year. So any questions regarding math or what that looks like? Okay, so on to social and emotional. So if you notice, we just added this to the back of the rubric, so it's the exact same skill sets that they're looking for in the regular keep. We just fit it into our rubric here. So if you notice, we've got 0 to 3 points possible. So for opportunities to respond, the way it works is your 0 starts at the bottom, right? 0 points for no response. 1 point for refuses to respond, 2 points for reluctant, and then 3 points for confident. So that's how you would gather your scores for each one of those components. And they just add it up here. So same thing like the regular keep. You will not enter this information into the data gateway. This is just for you to have, for you to keep. At some point, board may decide to get some sort of aggregate level, but as of right now, this is just information for you to have. So that is what the rubrics look like. So looking at data entry. So you are going to go to the same place on Data Gateway as the regular keep to enter your data. If you are not a teacher that has access to Data Gateway, you're going to work with your principal or your special ed person or your assessment person within your school or district to get you on there to get access to that. And we are going to watch a little module. How to do that. So while I'm pulling this up, can anybody think of anything that they have questions about or concerns? Pretty straightforward. So one of the things we are going to be looking for is stakeholder feedback from you guys. So if you're interested in being part of that, please send me an email with your email address, and we will probably have a Google survey at the end that we will send to you, because we definitely want feedback on our rubrics and skill sets, and if you feel like they align or match. Okay. Did I do this right, Jerry? I know I'm not seeing it either.
I don't see anything.
All right, let's see if we have sound.
I hear it.
Welcome to Module 3, Entering Alternate Assessment Data. When you log into the Data Gateway into the My Tools Keep Results, you'll normally be prompted to go to the Entry Profile. But you're going to want to go to the Alternate Entry Profile, which is 2 tabs down from the normal Entry Profile tab. Once you click on that, you'll get a new section that says you are in the Alternate Assessment and you'll want to enter the scores for that particular student. So you can click on Student Alternate Entry Scores. It's going to take you to the list of students. You'll pick whichever student you're looking to do an alternate for. We're going to pick this lovely student. And once you get in there, you'll have the alternate assessment options and be able to pick where on the rubric that those students fell. You'll do that for each question. And then at the end, you'll hit Submit. And remember, if you enter anything incorrectly, you'll need to fix that before you hit Submit, as you're not able to go back in and change answers. Okay, just do a quick check back through, make sure your data is accurate and correct. Make sure they're all green and you have no yellow sections left. And then you'll just click Submit. And that'll take you back to the screen and you'll see the alternate items entered. You'll see the student scores here on the main page, and you can go back and view what you entered at any time by clicking on the View button. And you can review the results. Remember, Unit 3, Entering Alternate Assessment Data. When you log into the Data Gateway into the My Tools Keep Results, you'll normally be prompted to go to the Entry Profile, but you're going to want to go to the Alternate Entry Profile, which is 2 tabs down from the normal Entry Profile tab. Once you click on that, you'll get a new section that says you are in the Alternate Assessment and you'll want to enter the scores for that particular student. So you can click on Student Alternate Entry Scores. It's going to take you to the list of students. You'll pick whichever student you're looking to do an alternate for. We're going to pick this lovely student. And once you get in there, you'll have the alternate assessment options and be able to pick where on the rubric that those students fell. You'll do that for each question. And then at the end, you'll hit Submit. And remember, if you enter anything incorrectly, you'll need to fix that before you hit Submit, as you're not able to go back in and change answers. Okay, just do a quick check back through, make sure your data is accurate and correct. Make sure they're all green and you have no yellow sections left. And then you'll just click Submit. And that'll take you back to the screen and you'll see the alternate items entered. You'll see the student scores here on the main page, and you can go back and view what you entered at any time by clicking on the View button. And you can review the results. Remember, you're not able to change them without a district override or your assessment director at your charter or district or school that can override to let you go in and change the data. And that's all there is to entering the alternate assessment data.
Okay, so you'll notice here when she is putting the scores in, we don't have you entering individual skill sets. We just have you marking for each domain where the student fell, whether they were at emerging, approaching target, not yet emerging. So that's what you're going to mark on the data gateway. And we apologize for the kind of the lag. But that's what she's showing there. And knowing that you have to have something marked for each essential element there, or you won't be able to submit it and continue through. And once you do submit, if you made a mistake, you have to have someone in your district with access to unlock that. So just make sure that you double check all of your answers before you submit those scores. So one of the conversations that has come up before in the face-to-face trainings was, what if I feel like the student should be taking the regular keep instead? So I would advise, if you go through this rubric and you feel like your kiddo is sitting really at that target or advanced target, then I would not put the scores in. And then what she's showing right here is once you go back and you've submitted those scores, it will pop up just your raw data number for literacy and numeracy. And you can go back in and view those scores at any point. So same thing, we don't know exactly what those scores mean, what's considered proficient, not proficient, but eventually, hopefully by the end of the fall, we'll have a little better idea of what those numbers mean. And so that next year when we do this, it'll automatically populate a score for you on what it means. And so one of the other things we're also working on as far as this reporting system is a score report. So eventually you will be able to print out a nice score report that you can use for yourself, for information, give to parents, and use during IEP meetings as well. So do you have any questions on entering the data into the data gateway? Okay, let's see. Go back to this. Okay, so and one of the other things we talked about earlier is that when you get in there to the data gateway and you click on the tabs, you're going to see all of your kindergartners. So just be really cautious about which tab you're entering students in. And we've kind of talked about this as far as looking at scaled scores. We're considering this year an operational field test. So sometime this fall, we'll go ahead and get with the Center of Assessment and look at establishing those scores. And so next school year, we'll be able to have that immediately for you. So I had someone ask me yesterday, why is the state going to such work on this where kindergarten is not required? Are they planning on changing that? If so, will class sizes be regulated? I'm looking to have 30 plus students this year in one class. So I'm not sure I can speak to class sizes right now for you. What I can say is, the reason why they went ahead and did this kindergarten assessment, and I don't know, Hillary, if you were part of the regular KEEP training at all. One of it started with school districts. There were some superintendents from different school districts that got together and decided, you know what, wouldn't it be really nice to have a common assessment so that we can compare our kids to each other, kids to different districts. And so that's kind of where this started. And it was, part of it is the funding. So any district that is taking funding for pre-K services or kindergarten services, there's a grant that they're required to have an assessment and show that growth component. So that was one of the reasons why this initiative started, and they went out and decided to make a common kindergarten assessment. So, and with that, whenever we have a state assessment, we provide an alternate. So I hope that makes sense. So does that throw off real scores? 15 kids compared to 30. I am not going to even pretend to try to explain to you how scores get set. That is what our psychometrician people at the Center of Assessment do for us. They help us take all this information, number of participants, and put those numbers together for us. But yeah, some good questions. Okay. And with this rubric, one of the things we were just talking about it too, it's possible that the Center of Assessment may come back and say, we look at the data that you guys have put in and we say maybe at the beginning of the year we don't expect students to be able to do all of these skill sets. Maybe we only expect them to do X, Y, Z, and that would be considered proficient at the beginning of the school year. So we're not quite sure what any of this means. That's what they're going to help us determine. So knowing that it's kind of that operational field test, kind of a pilot year, especially for the rubric, your feedback, your scores that we'll look at will all go into play and help us kind of determine with those psychometricians what really this should be looking like. So we definitely want your feedback and are open to what you think is best for kids with this rubric. So then here's just an email with all of the people that you can contact. So general testing questions would be Jennifer Thronston or Sydney Carter, Sarah Woodkey, or Shannon Ferentz. If you're looking for any questions on the accommodations or Braille, with the regular KEEP or any alternate assessment stuff, that would be me, Tracy Gooley. You can contact Tanya Semerad as well. She's in our special ed department under significant cognitive students with disabilities and students with autism. And then Crystal Thomas is our sensory impairment specialist. So she deals specifically with like deaf and blind. So those would be your special ed contacts. So we have come to the end of this presentation. So do you guys have any other questions or concerns? Okay, and please feel free to email me with anything that may come up when you jump into administering these rubrics with kiddos. If you find, wow, I think this skill set would be better placed in this performance level or is better fit maybe with a different essential element, please send me an email and let me know. So that's the feedback we're looking for this year. And with that, I say good luck and let us know if there's any other assistance you need with administering the KEEP or the alternate KEEP to your kindergartners this year. Yes, so my email, I'll go back up one, is the Tracy Gooley, but I'll put it in the chat box as well so you can copy and paste it if you'd like. Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you and have a good afternoon.